Good morning and welcome back to my workbench. This is the Stihl MS361. We had this on the bench a few days ago. I had to order parts, so the parts have all arrived now. If you want to see the look over and the diagnostics, then you'll want to go back and see part 1. This is going to be part 2 as you put the saw back together and get it back into service. Today I'm going to be replacing the oil cap because that's where the leak is coming from. I'm going to be replacing 3 AV mounts that are broken and worn out. I'm going to be replacing the carburetor. And if you want to see the fine details of why I'm doing that, it's all in part 1. If I can't guarantee a carb rebuild, I don't do a carb rebuild. New spark plug, new fuel filter, new air filter. This saw has been in service for 20 years. It's cut commercially. It's cut firewood for 2 families every winter. And the only thing that's ever been done to it is had the air filter cleaned. The spark plug is still original from new. So we're going to give this saw freshening up and get it back to the customer to start working again. The saw was quite dirty, so I took it out, cleaned everything out. The recoil was packed. The saw was very dirty, so it's all cleaned up. We're starting with a clean saw. The first thing I'm going to do is replace all 3 worn out AV mounts and springs and the chain catcher, which is missing. So let's get started. So the first one I'm going to do is this little donut style AV. And this goes so up in the front of the saw here, down in there. It used to be there. It's not there anymore. 20 years. I guess it probably just rotted away. If you want the part number for that mount, there it is right there. So I'll be removing this screw, which holds the chain catcher on, which I'll be replacing because it's missing. And loosening this off loosens this, which gives me access to get down in there to replace the AV mount. T27 to remove that. 90% of these chainsaws are taken apart with a T27. If it's not a T27, I will specify. If you want to get yourself one of those, there's the part number from Stihl. Let's get that screw out of there. That's what's left of the chain catcher. To make this a little bit easier and give me some more wiggle room here, I'm going to also remove this one, which is broken and being replaced anyways. T27 on top, two T27s in the handle. Got my 3 screws out. This AV mount was already broken and just hanging in here, so we'll just pull it out. There's what's left of it. And while we're doing it, let's just take this one out too. 3 T27s. There's that one out. So the reason this saw was so loose and floppy, this mount, if you can see it, it's just all cracked, just completely worn out. And this one, well, it's pretty obvious what the problem there was. And then this one is just completely gone. The other ones, there's one right there. That one's fine, so we're not touching it. But we'll replace these 3, and that'll tighten the saw back up. Okay, so out of the 3 AVs that we're going to replace, this one is going to be the hardest to do. So let's get the hardest one done first. So what I'm going to do, there's a peg in there that little donut is going to attach to. So I'm going to gently pry this out, and then I will install it. Bear with me. So very carefully, I'm not going to move this around too much. I've got this out and exposed. Okay, I'm going to clean this peg up and then I'll install this. There it is. Next, I'm going to fight this back into there, and then I'll put this side in after. Right. It's all back in place. I didn't break anything. I didn't cut myself. It's a good day. Next, we're going to replace the chain catcher and put our screw back in. That chain catcher part number, if you want it. There it is right there. So there's my chain catcher, and there's what was left of it on this saw. Okay. Now our chain catcher is reinstalled. If you caught me there putting that in and then I turned it back a little bit before I tightened it, this is a coarse screw that goes into plastic, and I don't want to cut new threads in the plastic, so that's why I did that. Okay, next, let's replace the AV mount that I took out of here. You want that part number. There it is right there. Let's get this installed. This one won't be near as hard as that other one we just did. Okay, next we'll replace the broken spring that we took off the top here with a new one. And if you want that part number, there it is. Squeeze that into the handle first. Put my two screws back in. These go in tough because I'm cutting new threads into the new part. Okay, so those two are in. Now we just have our top screw left here. So this screw is going into the cylinder, so you want to be very careful not to strip this one. You want to hold your hand on the spring until you get this tightened down. There we go. That one's installed. All three of our AV mounts and springs have been replaced. That's a tight little saw right there. Our bar oil cap is leaking. Let's just put a new one on it. There's your part number. There's a string in here that you have to detach. Just grab it and unattach it. There's the old one. Okay, there we go. Let's put our muffler back on. So I've got the muffler with the gasket, the cooling plate, and I dropped my muffler screws down in and got them through this side. This is a little finicky, so we're going to reinstall this now. Okay, we'll just make sure these are tightened back down. And I've got one more screw here that goes in the side there. Okay, our muffler is reattached. Let's replace the fuel line and the fuel filter. Pliers. Old fuel line. Let's put our new fuel line on. Part number. I'm going to put a little bit of press fluid just on this joint right here. And I'm going to put my fuel line down through and into the tank. Some of you are probably wondering what this press fluid is that I keep using. So this helps install Stihl rubber parts. You don't want your parts popping back out of place, so you want to use something that dries up and disappears and doesn't leave it oily. So I'm going to use this to go in the fuel tank and gently pull on the fuel line while I'm pushing from the top with something blunt. You got to be very careful doing this. You can tear the fuel line. The little grommet, you got to get seated in there. I think it's in. Yep, it is in. Yep. New fuel line installed. And let's install a new fuel filter. Okay. New fuel filter, new fuel line. So I've got my fuel line routed properly here and in its slot. So let's go ahead and replace the carburetor. For this saw, this serial number, this is the carburetor I'm putting on it. This carb comes with everything except for on the old carb, I need to take that little rubber O-ring off and put it on the new one. So I'll just remove this O-ring carefully off of the old piece. And we'll put it onto the new one. Okay, so there's our new carb ready to go. Okay, my guide piece here, I'll put it on now. And then we will slide this carb on. Going into our fuel line on one side. just attaching my throttle rod back onto the carburetor. Okay. It's in place there. And then just make sure that everything's working before we go any further. Yep, it's all hooked up properly. Let's put a new spark plug in it. BPMR 7A. The gap is perfect, 20 thou. Let's put our air filter base back on. It snaps on just over that O-ring. There, it's in place there now. Put our two nuts back on. These are 8 mil. Let's put our recoil back on. Okay, let's put our top cover back on. I've got this little grommet here that needs to, it just slides right in there. Okay, I'll put the spark plug cap back on. And we'll put a new air filter on it. There it is if you want it. So on some saws, your air filter has its own hardware that holds it on. On the 361, your air filter cover is what holds the air filter on. So you always want to make sure that it's on tight and check it periodically, because if it vibrates loose, your air filter is coming loose as well. If that happened, you would start sucking dirt past the air filter, and you don't want that to happen. We're on the home stretch here. Let's replace the rim sprocket. Okay, so we'll take the clip off. Okay, so my clip, washer, there's the old one. Should wear safety glasses when you're doing this. We're all back together here. I'm going to put the bar and chain back on it. Put some fuel in it. This is called a no-spill gas can. I buy them from Stihl, but I think you can get them many different places. Saves a lot of mess. Okay, so we'll get the carb tuned, and I'll meet you at the wood pile. Wow, what a nice running saw. So this saw was dropped off here in non-running condition. He couldn't get it started. The handles were flopping all over the place. Every AV mount was wore out. It was leaking bar oil. He said he's had it 20 years and it's probably time for a new saw. He was pricing out new 362s. But I told him, like, this saw is probably worth spending some money on. Before you decide, if you don't need a saw today, let me have a look at it and we'll go from there. So if you haven't watched part 1 of this 361, you'll want to go back and see it. You'll see the condition that this saw came in here in. It was just loose and floppy and wouldn't run. So I tore it apart, found out exactly what it needed to go back into service. I called him and quoted him, and he said, go ahead and fix it. I'm so glad he did because I love working on these. Fixing this chainsaw was way more satisfying than selling him a new saw ever would have been. Well, the case is closed on this 20-year-old MS361. It's going to head back out and do 20 more years of work. I have lots of chainsaws sitting in line waiting to be fixed. So let's get on to the next one. Thanks for watching.